In the last episode, Benny Sisko had a vision from the prophets showing a desert and a face, the latter of which turned out to be his biological mum, as his dad explained afterwards. That same mum had a locket with ancient Bajoran writing on the back talking about an orb of the emissary. It's the first Sisko's heard of such an orb, but the newly emboldened cult of the Parrays knew about it, which is why one of them came to shank him. If he'd used a gun instead, this would have been successful, which I like to think is a lesson on functionality being more important than aesthetics, but he didn't, which is why Sisko's still alive and now thinks this orb is more important than ever. That's why they're all going to the desert in his vision, Jake and Joseph deciding to come along too. They might have a fourth member as the new host of Sisko's old mate Dax turns up to say hi. The previous host of Dax did a dead last season, and her husband, Worf, wants to go off and win a terribly dangerous battle in her name, with Bashir and O'Brien deciding they'll tag along too. Also, one of Bajor's moons has been fortified by Romulans after saying they wanted it for a hospital, and they're now refusing to move all of the space nukes they've installed. Let's rejoin everybody and see how these threads weave together. Ezri Dax is introducing herself to Sisko and making a proper pig's ear of it too. The problem, it seems, is getting all of her memories in order, as she was not in the slightest bit prepared for joining. See, she's not a member of the Trill host program. She was serving on the ship taking the Dax symbiont back to Trill when things started going pear-shaped. Presumably there were reasons preventing it from just being shoved into stasis, but the only solution was immediate implantation, and Ezri was the only Trill aboard. We'll also presume the journey was so long that removing Dax without killing Ezri was no longer an option, so they gave her some leaflets about how to not turn into a Goa'uld and sent her on her way. All of which was so completely useless that she decided the best person to help her was Sisko, as he's already known 2 Dax hosts before. If that means going to Tyree with them all, then so be it. Back on Deep Space Nine, or more accurately a Klingon ship docked there, Worf's holding a ceremony for Dax, Jadzia, that is. Bashir and O'Brien are there too, so it's about their plan to get her into Stovokor, and it looks like Quark's decided to come along for the ride as well. Whether he'd have volunteered if he'd known it involved bloodletting is another matter. While they spill blood, Admiral Ross is trying to prevent it. He's as upset as Kira is about the Romulans sticking weapons on a Bajoran moon, which is why Starfleet has sent a very, very strongly worded letter indeed. That's as far as they're willing to go at the moment, as the Romulans are far more useful in a war than Bajor, and he makes it very clear that she won't be getting any help from the Federation. That's not going to stop Kira, though. The weapons aren't actually live yet, so she's going to blockade the moon and prevent the parts arriving, which is pretty optimistic given the state of Bajor's military after 50 years of occupation. To a mega shuttle we go, the Rio Grande to be specific, according to the registry. Presumably Sisko nicked it from DS9 3 months back and is using it for his own private vehicle. Just as well he did, given that we've used it to fly to Tyree to look for the orb of the emissary. Science wibblies mean scanning from orbit is out of the question, so after a little auditory hallucination for Sisko about doctors and isolation wards, we teleport to the planet's surface for a poke around. A desert planet is, ironically, not the hottest place we'll be going this episode. Worf's terribly dangerous mission to get Jadzia into Stovokor requires kabooming a shipyard, and the current plan is flying into a star. Well, pretty close to it anyway. We'll fart science at it and let the resulting sun splooge kaboom the shipyard for us. Sounds bloody dangerous, which is why Quark's not impressed with Worf giving him the cold shoulder despite risking his life. Trying to force Worf into showing some appreciation instead makes him tell Quark to eat shit. As far as he's concerned, allowing them to share this glory in her name despite being unworthy of her is quite generous enough. Trekking across a desert planet isn't a fun holiday at the best of times, and Sisko's brisk pace and non-committal attitude to direction isn't helping Dax feel better about things. At least she's having more fun than Joseph. We'll leave them to it and revisit DS9. Kira's organising her blockade of the moon the Romulans have fortified, though calling it a blockade is pretty generous. The handful of ships the Bajorans can spare would struggle to defend against harsh language, but Kira's hoping the Romulans won't risk losing the Federation as allies against the Dominion by opening fire. Back on Tyree, Sisko's still setting a grueling pace. Joseph and Jake have fallen behind, and even Sisko's starting to struggle, so he takes his baseball and a shovel while leaving the backpack full of water. Perhaps his commitment might have something to do with yet another auditory hallucination about a doctor. Either way, Dax is tired of his shit, and seeing him fiddle with the baseball takes it off him and tosses it. Cue a flashback to the restaurant when the baseball triggered his vision, and that convinces him where the ball landed is where he needs to dig. To DS9 once more, or more accurately, a Bajoran ship orbiting a moon in the same system. Odo's with Kira on the lead ship when Admiral Ross and Senator Kretak call. The expected Romulan ships are on their way, and Ross is trying to calm shit down before they arrive in a few hours. Kira tells him to balls and hangs up with a threat to poop at any ship attempting to pass, a threat Kretak dismisses as a bluff to Ross. While they prepare for conflict, Martok, husband of Sorella, is trying to solve one. He's telling Worf he thinks Bashir, O'Brien and Quark don't deserve the shit they're getting, and when they arrive, Worf goes over to apologize. In truth, knowing how close Dax was to them was a source of jealousy in him, so much so that he wanted this mission to be his alone. Bugger all of that, though, as we've arrived, and it's what you'd call a very target-rich environment. Sisko's arrived at his destination too, a distinctly familiar orb-housing box. As he moves to open it, his auditory hallucinations become visual ones, and a voice tells him to put down the pencil he's holding. That's because he's not a Starfleet officer on a desert planet digging up boxes, but rather a 1950s science fiction author scribbling a story on the walls of his psychiatric cell. A doctor, who looks suspiciously like Damar Dawson Biggs out of makeup, is telling not Sisko that it's time to let go of his fantasies and get better. Back on Tyree, Sisko's unresponsive, and Jake trying to move him ends with getting knocked on his ass by lightning. Whatever's going to happen, it'll be Sisko alone who does it. The Romulan convoy is approaching, and they're not listening to Kira when she tells them to piss off. Ross and Kretak give her another call, though need not have bothered, as her response is the same. Worf's adventure is about to get interesting as well. They're approaching the star near those shipyards, and O'Brien's found a solar wibbly they can use. Well, one they'll be able to use when they get closer anyway, assuming they're still in one piece. Back in 1950s Earth, not Damar Dawson Biggs is telling not Sisko to paint over the story, as it's the only way he's going to get better. Over on planet Tyree, Sisko seems to agree. He's trying to bury the orb box, and Dax telling him to stop it doesn't work. To Worf again, and we're ready to try our wibbly. Sneaky bastard mode is turned off, and we do a science to the sun, all of which results in precisely bugger all. Worf's not willing to give up, and O'Brien prepares for another go, but we've been spotted, and there are some Jem'Hadar ships incoming, so we'd best get a move on. To planet Tyree once more, where Dax is trying to get through to Sisko, telling him opening the box is how he fulfills his promise to Jadzia of making things right seems to do the trick, and he drops the shovel. Not Sisko drops the paint roller he's holding too, and after twatting not Damar Dawson Biggs and his mate, grabs his pencil once more and continues the story. Sisko opens the box and wibbly blue prophet stuff shoots into space and back to Bajor. The wormhole reopens and shits out what is presumably a Par-Wraith, which promptly kabooms. This, it would appear, is sufficient to bolster Kira's faith, and she tells her ships to prepare for a fight. Maybe the prophets have lent a hand to Worf and company too, as we're ready to do a science again. The sun wibbly works this time, kabooming both the pursuing ships and the rest of the shipyard. Celebrations are had by all, and Worf chants Jadzia's entry to Stovokor as we scarp her. Back at DS9, the Romulan ships have decided to turn around and bugger off home. The reason? Admiral Ross said Starfleet would intervene if Senator Kretak didn't remove the space nukes. Whether that's an attack of conscience or Ross deciding he probably shouldn't piss off gods now they're back is left unsaid. Speaking of gods, Sisko's in orb vision mode and talking to a prophet in the image of his mum. It's telling him the Par-Wraith's been booted and everything's hunky-dory now. Oh, and it possessed the body of his biological mum for a while, so she'd do the dirty with his dad and make him, as he's an important component of their plans. That's why Sarah scarpered when the prophet buggered off. None of it was her choice. Sisko takes this deeply unethical news pretty well considering, but I suppose being the offspring of gods gives you a different perspective on things. Sisko's arriving back on DS9 to a welcoming crowd. The prophets are back and it's business as usual, presumably in between a fair few Bajorans removing evidence that they were ever anything other than completely pious. News that Dax has regenerated into her 9th incarnation is met with some confusion, possibly because they were expecting Christopher Eccleston. Worf in particular is somewhat thrown by the whole thing, but Dax seems pleased to be back to somewhere she recognizes, so we'll leave her to explore old things with new eyes, until the next adventure. A funny thing occurred to me while watching this episode. As I was thinking about the play and counterplay of prophets and pares, I thought to myself, hold on a minute, this is just the end of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I suppose I should put a spoiler warning here for a 34-year-old film. Anywho, for those not familiar with the film, the ending is basically two different parties trying to out-time-fuckery each other. One party says they went into the past to set up a trap, the other says they went into the past to arrange a key to get out of the cage, etc., etc. How's that applicable here? Well, I set up a reckoning between we prophets and you pares to solve this once and for all.
Ah, but I put a shit kite in power so she'll stop it. Also, I've set up a parave to cut off the Celestial Temple afterwards.
All right, but I hit a prophet on another planet before that, so Sisko could release it to kick out your mate and reclaim the temple. Now, I'm not saying that's a deliberate thing, as Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey is hardly the first, or indeed most notable, time-fuckery story to exist, but I would point out that William Sadler, who plays Sloane of Section 31, is also the same guy who plays the Grim Reaper in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Another entry on the plain simple Garak coincidence list, I think. To the main thrust of the story then, and the revelation that Sisko is part god. I know there's some controversy over this particular decision, religion and Trek being somewhat of a taboo, but I don't agree with the idea that faith and belief are subjects Trek should never touch. Which is not to say that I like it, because I don't. I personally feel it's one of the largest missteps made by the entire series, but I hate it for completely different reasons. 7 episodes back in The Reckoning, the story gave us a little contrast and compare between Sisko and Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag. Sisko, the utter unknown from a different species, was favoured by the prophets over Kai Sin, someone who'd put in years of overt worship while really using it as a means of amassing personal power. That is a strong moral. Sisko was granted audience with the prophets because of his actions and attitudes, not as a result of time served. It showed the fallacy of transactional religion, performative worship given only for what is received, and how that's utterly worthless when compared to simply being a decent person. It was a commentary on how a god worthy of your reverence would care far more about what we do to each other than any amount of pomp and pageantry. And that is why I hate the revelation of this episode. It utterly undermines the point of the prophets favouring Sisko over Kai Sin, the idea that understanding the ethics behind your religion is far more important than the amount of time you spent on your knees. It changes Sisko was chosen because he knew what was right into Sisko was chosen because he's our special precious baby boo-boo godspawn and we take care of our own. The entire premise of Sisko being a fundamentally better person is cut off at the knees and replaced with nepotism. I loathe and detest the entire decision and struggle to think of a single other retcon that so completely neuters the moral thread of what came before. While I'm being pissy, I suppose we should probably talk about the Sarah Sisko business too. The writers do realise this makes the prophets sex offenders, right? Like, they literally forced a woman into a relationship that she didn't personally want. This is completely unambiguous too. Nobody can look at this and say they were nudging her into something she would have done anyway. Scarpering to the other side of the globe is not indicative of being fine with the situation. It's just a completely bizarre choice. I can't be the only person who finds that all kinds of fucked up, surely. Right, now I've got that out of my system, let's look at the rest, because there are plenty of things here worth looking at. The ding-dong between Worf and Quark is a good example of character exploration, for example. Worf being forced to address the motivation for his actions and having the honesty to accept they're driven in part by jealousy is a welcome bit of growth for him. He's been a possessive and controlling dick on a number of occasions in the past, and now we have a rationale for that. It doesn't make it right, but it does make it understandable. The stuff with Ezri Dax was good too. We've been told before how rigorous the selection process for hosts is and how long those candidates train for the joining. We've been told how a symbiont can overpower the will of those who are unprepared or unsure of themselves. Having that idea be the basis for Dax's new host thus gives us a chance to explore how all of that works in practice. We've previously theorized that the joining process might not be quite as difficult as those in charge suggest, and what we're given here offers evidence for and against. Ezri Dax is having trouble differentiating between the memories of hosts, but she does understand that's what's happening. There's no collapse of the self, Ezri subsumed by whoever's the most potent. On the one hand, this might suggest the selection process doesn't need to be quite as strictly regulated as it is. On the other, perhaps her successes so far are because she's already someone with enough dedication and commitment to have passed through Starfleet Academy. The single conclusion we can draw is that the selection and training of initiates performed by the Trill Symbiosis Commission is not so much required as desired, though quite how far those rules can stretch is still unknown. Let's end with the Romulan situation, shall we? There are probably those who watched ships approaching a blockade and thought to themselves, why not simply become invisible? I had the thought myself, so worked through it. Ultimately, I think it's a mixture of reasons. Deniability is the first. These are just defensive measures for a hospital complex after all. Bajor complaining about an ally protecting their injured paints the Romulans quite favourably. The other is arrogance. Kretak herself says the reputation is deserved, and acknowledging something isn't the same as fixing it, or even necessarily agreeing that it's bad. Kretak's a senator in the Romulan Star Empire after all, one of the largest and most powerful organizations in the area. By comparison, Kira's a former resistance fighter for a podunk little backwater planet. And those 2 points of deniability and arrogance would likely have worked if Admiral Ross had taken the standard Starfleet approach of looking sternly at something bad while audibly tutting. As I said in the summary, we don't know if this was a moral choice on his part or a desire to not piss off the prophets when they made themselves known again, but his decision to abandon the path of appeasement was clearly not expected by Kretak, and it was too late by then for the Romulans to just go sneaky bastard mode without serious consequences. I've been saying for many seasons that part of the reason Cardassia kept pulling its shit is because there were no real consequences. Seeing an admiral actually do something about dodgy shit for once is a pleasant change, even if we can't be sure it was entirely altruistic. End of episode.
Are you sure there was nothing in that book of yours about social media?
I checked my entire database.
The Forbidden Library of Bum Books.
Sigh. Yes, the Forbidden Library of Bum Books. I checked those and there's nothing about social media.
I guess we'll have to figure it out when we get there. If we get there anyway, is it just me or is this taking a while?
If we're going by in-universe time again, it's been over 3 months.
I thought the bug had started to wonk a bit.
Here's hoping we get there soon.
Perhaps it's a symbolic gesture to show just how removed from the rest of the world's social media can be.
Nah, that sounds too highbrow for the lad who makes these. He's probably just not got a new background ready yet. Woof.